The Arizona sun was just beginning its slow descent behind the jagged cliffs, casting long, dusty shadows over the dry desert trail. Jack Harper, a seasoned cowboy with a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes, rode his horse at a steady pace, scanning the horizon. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dust, and somewhere far off, the faint cry of a coyote echoed. Jack had been riding all day, checking traps and scouting for signs of stray cattle, when something unusual caught his eye. A small figure crouched near a dry creek bed. Squinting against the glare, Jack realized it was a little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old. Her clothes were torn, her dark hair tangled and dusty, and she clutched a small, worn leather pouch close to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, darting nervously at every sound. Jack slowed his horse, bringing it to a gentle stop a few feet away. He dismounted carefully, boots crunching on the sun-baked dirt. "Easy now, I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a calm voice. The girl froze, her eyes flicking to the weapon strapped to his hip, then back to his face. She whispered something, a single word that Jack had never heard before, but it had the soft, melodic quality of a native tongue. "I'm Jack," he said, kneeling down to lower himself closer to her height. "What's your name, little one?" The girl hesitated, her small hands tightening around the leather pouch. "Aya," she whispered finally. Her voice was soft but clear. Jack's heart clenched. She was alone, miles from any known settlement or trail. The desert was unforgiving to a child, and he knew that she wouldn't survive long on her own. "All right, Aya, you can come with me. I'll get you somewhere safe," Jack said gently. The girl looked at him uncertainly, but when he extended a hand, she hesitated only for a moment before taking it. The touch was small, almost fragile, and yet she held on with a quiet determination. As Jack helped her onto his horse, he scanned the surrounding hills. Tracks in the dirt suggested that she hadn't come alone, or perhaps she had been running from someone. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and distant horses. He didn't know if she had been lost for days, or if something worse had happened. Aya clung tightly to the leather pouch as Jack mounted his horse. "We're going to head east," he said, "toward where I think your home might be. Do you know the way?" The little girl nodded silently, pointing with a small, trembling finger toward the narrow canyon that led away from the desert plains. Jack adjusted his hat and nudged his horse forward. The sun dipped lower, and the first stars began to appear in the clear sky. The desert, which had seemed so empty and lifeless moments ago, now felt alive with danger and possibility. Somewhere out there, perhaps, was the home that Aya had lost, or the people who would mourn her absence if he didn't get her there in time. And Jack, a man who had faced outlaws and storms alike, knew that this simple act of helping a lost child would lead him into a journey far more dangerous and unexpected than any he had ever known. The desert stretched endlessly before them, an ocean of sand and rock under the blazing sun. Jack nudged his horse forward, careful to keep Aya steady on the saddle in front of him. Her small hands clutched the leather pouch so tightly that her knuckles were white. She said little, her dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every once in a while, she would point toward a canyon, a rocky ledge, or a hidden trail, as though she had an intimate knowledge of this harsh land. Jack had to admit, the girl's instincts were remarkable. The trail was treacherous. Loose stones slid under the horse's hooves, and sudden gullies threatened to send them tumbling. Jack kept a hand on Aya, murmuring reassurance. "Don't worry, little one. I've crossed worse paths than this." She gave him a faint, almost shy nod but said nothing. Jack knew she understood far more than she let on. As the day wore on, the sun climbed high, beating down relentlessly. Jack stopped occasionally to let the horse drink from small desert springs hidden beneath boulders. At one of these stops, he finally asked, "Aya, why were you out here alone?" Her answer came quietly, almost like a whisper of wind over the rocks. "They came," she said. "I ran." Her small frame shivered, and Jack felt a pang of sorrow. Whoever they were, they had scared this child enough to send her into the desert alone. The thought of what might have happened made him tighten his grip on the reins. By mid-afternoon, the terrain grew more rugged. Narrow passes forced Jack to lead his horse through steep, winding canyons, the shadows of cliffs stretching long across the path. Somewhere far above, the call of a hawk echoed, and the distant rumble of hooves suggested others might be nearby, outlaws or scouts. Jack's instincts kicked in. Every rock, every bush, every sound could conceal danger. Aya, however, seemed unfazed by the perils. She pointed to hidden paths and whispered warnings about uneven ground or loose stones. Jack began to realize that this little girl, lost as she was, had been taught to survive in this wilderness. Her eyes held a quiet strength, a courage that went far beyond her age. Night began to fall as they emerged from a narrow canyon. The sky was a swirl of reds and purples, the desert cool at last. Jack set up a small camp near a cluster of rocks, keeping the fire low. He fed the horse and shared a bit of jerky and water with Aya. She accepted the food silently but watched the shadows around them with wary eyes. Jack understood then that this journey was far from over. Whoever had left her alone, or chased her, was still out there, somewhere in the desert. And yet, as he looked at her small, determined face illuminated by firelight, he felt a fierce protective resolve. This little girl's life was now in his hands, and he would not let the desert, or anyone else, take her from him. Tomorrow, they would continue east, toward the distant cliffs and the lands Aya called home. Jack knew the journey would be dangerous, but the thought of her safety was enough to steel his nerves. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready. The desert was vast, but so was his determination to see this child safely home. The next morning, Jack and Aya continued their journey east. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden glow across the desert, turning every rock and cactus into sharp, glowing silhouettes. The canyon walls loomed taller as they rode, narrowing into a twisting maze of red cliffs and hidden paths. Jack guided the horse carefully, aware that one wrong step could send them tumbling down jagged rocks. Aya clung to him quietly, her small hands steady, her gaze fixed ahead, as though she could sense the path better than he ever could. By midday, faint smoke trails appeared on the horizon. Jack squinted, unsure if it was a distant campfire or simply the desert haze. Aya stiffened beside him, her head turning sharply. She pointed and whispered, "There, people." Jack slowed the horse and urged her to stay calm. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation without knowing who they were. As they approached, the figures became clearer. Mounted warriors, their bows and rifles in hand, emerging from behind boulders. The riders, horses pawed the ground, ears twitching, as they surrounded Jack and Aya. Jack raised his hands slowly, keeping his horse steady. "I mean no harm," he said in a calm, firm voice. "I've only brought her back. She's lost." The warriors exchanged tense glances. One stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing eyes and feathers woven into his dark hair. He studied Jack closely, then looked at Aya. The girl stiffened but didn't cry. Slowly, she nudged forward, pointing toward a distant lodge. After a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, the warrior lowered his weapon slightly. "She is yours?" he asked in a measured voice, nodding toward Jack. Jack nodded. "I found her alone, miles from your lands. I wanted to make sure she returned safely." The warrior made a series of low, sharp sounds to the other riders. They relaxed slightly but remained cautious. Then, without another word, they motioned for Jack to follow them through the twisting canyon paths. Jack felt a mix of relief and tension. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew that the child's safety now depended not just on his actions but on the trust of these warriors. The camp appeared as they rounded the last bend, a cluster of lodges nestled against a cliff, smoke curling from cooking fires. Children ran between lodges, laughing and playing, while women tended to fires and prepared food. Elderly men and women watched silently, their faces calm but wary. Jack dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. From the largest lodge, a figure emerged, a woman, tall and graceful, wrapped in a deep red blanket. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Aya. Jack felt a tension in the air, a mixture of relief and unspoken authority. The woman ran forward, scooping Aya into her arms. The girl buried her face against the woman's shoulder, safe at last. Jack watched quietly as the camp seemed to breathe around them. The warriors bowed slightly, showing respect not just to the woman, but to the bond between mother and child. Jack realized he had not simply returned a lost girl, he had delivered a child to a leader, someone whose strength and presence commanded the entire camp. The woman finally looked at Jack, her expression softening. "You have brought her back," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her eyes met his, steady and piercing, yet full of gratitude. Jack tipped his hat, sensing that the journey so far was only the beginning, and that he had just stepped into a world far more complex than he could have imagined. The camp settled into a quiet hum as the sun began its slow descent behind the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Jack stood at the edge of the main lodge's courtyard, keeping a respectful distance. Aya had run ahead as soon as she spotted her mother, disappearing into the tall woman's protective embrace. The sight made Jack pause. There was something commanding, almost regal, about the way she held the girl, as if shielding not only a child but the essence of the camp itself. The woman, Nayeli, stepped back slightly, allowing Aya to glance at Jack over her mother's shoulder. Her eyes, dark and intense, met his with a mixture of scrutiny and gratitude. Jack knew he was being weighed in the quiet, assessing gaze of a leader. There was no anger, no accusation, only the faint tension of someone whose child had been in danger. Nayeli's voice was calm but firm, carrying over the low crackle of fire and the distant murmur of the camp. "You have brought her back," she said, addressing Jack but more so affirming it to herself. She crouched to Aya's height, brushing the dust from her daughter's hair with gentle hands. "My heart thought I had lost you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The girl hugged her tightly, relief evident in her small body. Jack watched, feeling a sense of awe. He had dealt with outlaws, storms, and deserts that could swallow men whole, yet this quiet, profound reunion struck him with unexpected force. He had returned a child to her mother, but he had also delivered hope to an entire family, perhaps even a community. Nayeli finally stood straight, and the camp seemed to shift in response. Warriors and elders gave a subtle nod, acknowledging her authority. Jack realized that she wasn't merely a grieving widow, she was a respected leader, someone whose presence alone commanded the respect of the entire tribe. There was strength in her posture, wisdom in her eyes, and an unspoken weight that settled over the courtyard like the shadows of the cliffs. She turned fully to Jack, her gaze softening slightly. "You have risked your life to return my daughter," she said. Her voice was low but clear. "And for that, you have our gratitude." Jack tipped his hat, feeling an odd mix of humility and pride. The desert, he realized, had tested him in many ways, but nothing compared to the quiet intensity of this moment. For a long time, the three of them stood there, Jack, Nayeli, and Aya, connected in ways words could not describe. The little girl looked between them, sensing the unspoken bond forming. Jack felt something shift inside him, a realization that his journey had led him not just to a rescue, but to something far more profound, a place in a world he had never known, among people whose courage and heart rivaled his own. Finally, Nayeli spoke again, this time to the camp. "He has brought back my heart," she said, gesturing toward Jack. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement, yet the words carried weight. The warriors nodded, the elders murmured in acknowledgement, and even the children paused in their games. Jack felt a warmth he hadn't known in years, the quiet respect of a people who understood courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. As night fell over the camp, firelight flickering across faces and walls of the lodges, Jack realized the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging, even in a land that had always been harsh and unforgiving. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that Nayeli and Aya had changed his life forever. The night settled over the Apache camp, a quiet hush broken only by the crackle of small fires and the distant chirp of desert insects. Jack sat near one of the flickering flames, his horse tethered nearby, while Nayeli and Aya huddled close together inside the lodge. After a long pause, Nayeli finally spoke, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of memory and sorrow. She wanted Jack to understand what had happened, not just for the sake of the child, but for the honor of her people. "They came in the night," Nayeli began, her dark eyes fixed on the fire. "A band of outlaws, desperate men who had no respect for life, no respect for our lands. They attacked our hunting party while we slept, thinking we were alone." She paused, letting the words sink in. Aya stirred slightly in her mother's arms but remained silent. Jack leaned forward, listening intently. "The men were violent," Nayeli continued. "They burned our fires, stole what little we had, and took what they could not carry by force. We tried to protect ourselves, but there were too many. In the chaos, Aya's father, my husband, was killed defending her and the others. The rest scattered into the canyons. And Aya, she was gone." Her voice cracked, but her posture never wavered. She was a widow, yes, but she was also a leader. Strength and grief intertwined in every movement she made. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had faced danger, but the calculated cruelty of men against the innocent was something else entirely. He had never met such devastation firsthand, yet he was witnessing the aftermath in a single small child and her mother's unbroken strength. How did she survive? He asked gently. Nayeli's lips curved in a faint, proud smile. She hid, just as I taught her. Brave, careful, she knew the land even in the dark. The desert became her shield, and her courage carried her until you found her. She looked at Aya with fierce pride. Her father would have been proud too. The fire crackled, casting long shadows over their faces. Jack realized that the camp's respect for Nayeli was not just for her role as a mother, but for the leadership she had assumed in the face of tragedy. Her decisions, her courage, and her calmness in guiding her people were what commanded respect, not fear. And in that moment, he understood that Aya had been entrusted to the right hands, not just to his own, but ultimately to a mother who would protect her at any cost. Nayeli finally turned to Jack. You risked your life to bring her back. Our people will remember that, she said quietly, but with a weight that made the words feel like a vow. Jack nodded, humbled. I did what any man would do, he replied, though he knew the desert, the outlaws, and the unknown dangers had all tested him far more than he expected. As the night deepened, the camp settled into a quiet rhythm. Fires flickered, shadows danced, and Jack realized that this story, Aya's survival, her father's sacrifice, Nayeli's courage, was larger than any single man. It was a story of endurance, resilience, and hope, carried forward by a small child who had already faced more than most ever would. And Jack knew, in the quiet of that desert night, that his role in it was only the beginning. Tomorrow, they would plan the next steps, ensuring the safety of the camp. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply witness the power of courage, both in a widow's heart and in the small, brave girl who clung to her. The sun rose slowly over the rugged cliffs of the Apache lands, painting the canyon walls with streaks of gold and crimson. The camp was already alive with movement, warriors practicing their routines, women preparing meals, and children laughing as they ran between lodges. Jack Harper stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching the rhythm of life resume after the tension of recent days. For the first time in years, he felt the pull of a community, a place where courage, respect, and family were inseparable. Aya ran to him first, her small hands gripping his coat as she laughed. Don't go yet, she said, her eyes wide with hope. Jack knelt and smiled. I have to ride back soon, he said softly. She pouted briefly but then ran back to her mother, who had emerged from the lodge, observing quietly. Nayeli approached, her long shadow stretching across the sand. There was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a combination of gratitude, respect, and something Jack didn't fully understand. You have a place here anytime, Nayeli said gently. The words carried weight, a subtle invitation and an acknowledgement of what he had done. Jack nodded, tipping his hat, though he could feel the unusual tightness in his chest. He had come only to return a lost child, yet he was leaving with a connection that he had never anticipated. The camp, the mother, and the girl had become part of his story in ways he could not ignore. As the morning unfolded, Jack helped repair fences and check the horses, moving among the Apache warriors who regarded him with quiet respect. Their trust had been earned, not through words but through actions, and Jack understood this deeply. Every glance, every nod, acknowledged the danger he had faced and the life he had returned to its rightful place. Even the children watched him with curiosity, sensing that he was different from the outsiders they had seen before. When the day grew warmer, Nayeli led him to the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the sprawling desert below. The desert is vast, she said softly, but it is also full of life, lessons, and danger. You have seen both sides, Jack Harper. You have proven your courage. Jack looked at her, noting the subtle authority in her posture, the quiet strength that radiated even in calm moments. He realized then that courage was not only in facing danger but in holding steadfast to what matters most. Aya tugged at his sleeve once more, laughing, before running back to play with the other children. Jack laughed softly. He knew he had found more than he expected, safety for a child, gratitude from a mother, and the knowledge that his actions had left a lasting mark on a community. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging in a place not his own. He mounted his horse, ready to return to the open plains he had always called home, but he glanced back at Nayeli and the camp one last time. There was a connection now, unspoken but enduring, a bond forged through courage, trust, and compassion. And as he rode into the desert, he knew that the road ahead, though uncertain, held promise, hope, and perhaps even friendship, loyalty, and a place where his heart could rest. The wind carried the faint laughter of children, the soft murmur of a proud mother, and the memory of a brave little girl who had taught a seasoned cowboy the true meaning of courage. Jack's journey had begun with a rescue, but it ended with something far more profound. A new path, one that led not just across the desert, but into the hearts of those he had saved, and those who had, in turn, saved him.